Okay friends, it's time to get started on replacing our front struts. The first thing you want to do is safely raise and support the front of your vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. Do that by the pinch rail right along here. Once you've done that, we're going to continue on to removing all 5 of our lug nuts and then the wheel. So now that we have the wheel off, we have a nice clear view of our front strut. The next thing that I'm going to do is release my ABS wire from this clip right here. Just carefully get in between this area, separate it, and do that. Now after that, we want to go ahead and remove this bolt right here, and then the other one that's right there. We'll do this using our 14mm socket. There's one. Get that off of there in 1 second. Do this one. Now these kind of have some weird clips on them, so we'll figure that out, getting it back together. It can be a little bit difficult, but it's not too bad overall. Go ahead and slide this out of the way. Make sure you have plenty of slack with your ABS wire and your brake flex hose. Now let's move along to removing the sway bar link from the strut itself. I'm going to use a 17mm socket on this to try to remove it with my air gun. If you're not, or you find that the stud for the sway bar link is just spinning while you're trying to remove the nut, you can generally use a wrench on the nut, and then in the center right here you can use an Allen head socket. Just go ahead and put it in there with a ratchet, hold it still, and then reverse the nut. Now what you're going to notice is the sway bar link itself is generally going to be kinked in one direction or even the other. So I'm just going to use a pry bar. I'm going to carefully get in between the sway bar right down here and the frame and just try to pull down on this. You can see it straightens out. Slide that right out of the way. Now let's continue on to removing the 2 bolts that hold the strut to the knuckle. You're going to find that there's a 21mm headed bolt right here. It comes through, and then there's a nut on the other side. Let's go ahead and hold onto that bolt so it can't spin and remove the nut. Let's get this on here. Use a 22 on the nut side. There's that one. Okay. Now before I start pulling out this bolt right here, there's something that I want to mention. This, when you start pulling it apart, is going to want to try to separate and come towards you, but we want to make sure that this doesn't necessarily come too far forward and put too much of a tug on your axle. If you felt the need, you could use a 30mm socket right here. It's a 12-point. Just go ahead and remove this nut right here. That way there you can push the axle through and you don't necessarily have to worry about it. For me, I'm just going to go ahead and try to press this in, push out this bolt. Once I get it apart, I'm just going to separate it and try to lean it aside. You could also use a bungee cord or a strap or whatever you might happen to have. There we are. Now, like I said, you want to make sure that you leave this like this and not pulled out, putting a flex on any of your boots. At this point, we're going to move into the engine compartment. You're going to find your strut towers, and on those strut towers, you're going to find 3 mounting studs that come from the strut up and through them. We're going to go ahead and remove all 3 of these 15mm headed nuts. This one in here can be the hardest to get to. I just use a shallow socket, and you might find that it really doesn't want to fit on there if you put it on the ratchet first. But if I just do this, then I slide my ratchet in there, generally I can at least get the majority of the tip of my ratchet onto it, and I can get these loose. There's the first one. We'll set that aside, and then we're going to do the same to the other 2. Something to mention though is once you remove your last nut fully, there's going to be nothing else holding the strut into the vehicle. So just go ahead and loosen it, but leave it on there a little bit. Reach underneath, grab onto the strut, and then you can fully remove the last nut. There's that. Now let's go ahead and pull this out of the fender well. There it is, friends. Okay, now it's time to install our brand new front strut. Make sure that you fully remove your nuts. Let's go ahead and take this. We're going to slide it up and into the strut tower here. Try to line up those studs with their corresponding holes. Once you have the studs up through there, go ahead and take your locking nuts. Start all 3 of them on. Now from inside the wheel well, we can still move this around. Let's go ahead and get this lined up with the strut. I'm just going to go ahead and lift this up. If you have a hard time lifting this up, you could use a jack or even maybe a pry bar or something like that. And then we're just going to take our 2 mounting bolts. I always like to use a little bit of red thread locker on these. Start them through from the front towards the rear. Get that in there. Let's start on both of these nuts here. Okay, now we're going to bottom these out and we'll torque them to manufacturer specifications. Let's go ahead and snug these up. Now let's torque them to 177 foot-pounds. This one right here. Now we're going to try to get the sway bar link back into the strut. Like I said before, you can tell that it's not perfectly aligned, so let's just go ahead and pull down on that sway bar a little bit. Slide the stud into position, get the nut on there, tighten it up. Now we're going to move along to resecuring our hose and our ABS wire. Let's start off with the brake hose though. We're going to go ahead and take this. You can see it has a little ear right here. You also have the area with the flex hose that goes through the bracket. What I want to do first is come down and underneath this hook right here with the hose itself so that the bracket kind of goes under that area. And then I'm going to take this little hooky-doo and bring it right up into this area. Should slide up in. While that's sitting in there, we essentially want to try to line up the hole between these two. Assuming that looks good, let's continue on to this one. Now the ABS wire has 2 little hooks on it. This one's going to be a little bit harder, especially where you have to try to line up all 3 holes at this point. Just going to go ahead and slide this over the top, slide in the bottom area, and then just try to line up the hole like I said, put in your mounting bolt. All right, we got that one in there. Let's go ahead and do this one. Now for this part, the flex hose itself has a little piton on it, and that needs to fit into the hole that's alongside of the mounting bolt hole. And put this right up in there, get that lined up, start our mounting bolt in there. Give everything a nice wiggle, make sure it's secure. Now let's go ahead and get our wheel back up on here. We're going to start on all of our lug nuts, bottom them out, get the wheel back on the ground, and then torque them to 76 foot-pounds. Now that the wheel's on the ground, let's go ahead and torque them. Torqued. At this point, we have the wheel safely on the ground and the weight of the vehicle down on it. And that essentially is going to be pushing the strut all the way up against the strut tower. At this point, we can go ahead and tighten up all 3 of these mounting nuts, and then we'll torque them to 37 foot-pounds. Best I can. There's that one. All right. Okay, friends, we got our front strut in there. What's left to do now? Now you're going to do the exact same thing to the other side of the vehicle. It's the exact same process. After that, go ahead and take your vehicle for a road test, listen for funny noises, and get yourself safely down to your local alignment shop. Thanks.